I knew the moment I bought my townhouse in Lakewood, Colorado, that the homeowners association was going to be a pain. But I never imagined it would escalate to the point where I would be standing in a police station filing a report against my HOA president while a blizzard raged outside. My name is Franklin Calloway, and this is the story of how a simple parking dispute turned into something much bigger than either of us expected. The first time I met Deborah Patterson, she was standing in my assigned parking spot with her arms crossed, clipboard in hand, and a scowl that could curdle milk. It was late September, and I had just moved into the Silverwood Estates townhome community. The moving truck was blocking half the street, and I was trying to coordinate with the movers while juggling a work call. The last thing I needed was a confrontation with the HOA president. "Excuse me, you cannot park that truck here," she said, her voice sharp and nasal. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair styled in that specific way that screamed manager escalation. Her pantsuit was pressed within an inch of its life, and she wore a lanyard with an HOA badge like it was some kind of federal credential. I held up one finger to her while finishing my call with my boss at the software company where I worked remotely. When I hung up, I tried my best to be polite. "Hi, I am Franklin. I just bought Unit 47B. This is my assigned parking spot according to my deed." "The truck is blocking the fire lane," she insisted, tapping her clipboard. I looked around. The truck was partially in my spot and partially in the access road, but there was easily 20 feet of clearance on either side. Emergency vehicles could pass without any issue. "We will be done in about 2 hours. Is that going to be a problem?" The HOA bylaws state that moving activities must be completed between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays only. Today is Saturday. She pulled out a copy of the rules, which I noticed was at least 40 pages thick. "I work during the week. I specifically asked the property manager about weekend moves, and she said it was fine as long as I was done by 7 p.m. I was already exhausted from the move, and this woman was testing my patience. Deborah's face tightened. "Well, the property manager doesn't make the rules. I do. I am the HOA president, and I expect all residents to follow the regulations to the letter." Our first interaction set the tone for everything that followed. Over the next few weeks, I received 3 violation notices. The first was for leaving my trash bin visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. I had put it out Tuesday night for Wednesday pickup and brought it in Wednesday evening when I got home from running errands. Apparently, that was 4 hours too long. The second notice was for hanging a small wreath on my door during early October, which violated the seasonal decoration policy that only allowed such items from November 1st through January 15th. The third was for parking my car 6 inches over the line of my assigned spot, which Deborah claimed was creating a safety hazard. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I paid the first 2 to avoid conflict, but I contested the third. That was when I learned just how much power an HOA president could wield in a community like Silverwood Estates. The HOA board consisted of 5 members, but Deborah ran it like her personal fiefdom. The other 4 members were her friends from the neighborhood, and they rubber-stamped every decision she made. When I appeared at the monthly board meeting to contest my parking violation, I was given exactly 3 minutes to state my case before they dismissed my appeal in a unanimous vote that took approximately 10 seconds. "Mr. Calloway," Deborah said from her position at the head of the conference table in the community clubhouse, "we maintain strict standards here at Silverwood Estates. If you wanted a more relaxed living environment, perhaps you should have considered purchasing elsewhere." I bit back a dozen responses and paid the fine. But I also started reading the HOA bylaws cover to cover. If Deborah wanted to play rules lawyer, I could play that game too. October rolled into November, and Colorado started experiencing the cold snaps that predicted a harsh winter ahead. The meteorologists were forecasting an unusually active storm season, with several major systems expected to dump significant snow across the Front Range. I grew up in Colorado and knew how to handle winter weather, so I made sure my townhouse was prepared. I bought a new snow shovel, stocked up on salt and sand, and made sure my all-wheel drive SUV had fresh winter tires. Deborah, meanwhile, started ramping up her enforcement of HOA rules. She sent out an email blast to all residents detailing the snow removal policies. According to the bylaws, the HOA was responsible for plowing the main roads and parking lots, but individual homeowners were responsible for clearing their assigned parking spots and the walkways leading to their front doors. Any homeowner who failed to clear their area within 24 hours of a snowfall would face a $100 fine. The first real snow came in mid-November, a modest 6-inch accumulation that blanketed the metro area overnight. I woke up at 6 a.m. and spent an hour clearing my parking spot, the walkway, and even helped my elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson, clear his area. By 8 a.m., my spot was pristine, with neat piles of snow stacked on the landscaped areas beside the parking lot. I went inside to make coffee and start my workday. Around 10 a.m., I heard a vehicle engine outside and glanced out my window. Deborah's silver Mercedes SUV was backing into my parking spot. I opened my front door and walked out into the cold. "Deborah, that is my assigned parking spot." She was getting out of her car, dressed in a long wool coat and leather gloves. "My spot has not been plowed yet. The HOA contractors are running behind, so I am temporarily using your spot while I conduct HOA business in this section of the community." "You just said homeowners are responsible for clearing their own spots. I cleared mine. You need to clear yours." I was standing at the edge of my walkway, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "As HOA president, I have the authority to use any parking spot in the community when conducting official business," she said, walking past me toward the next row of townhouses. I stood there, dumbfounded. I checked the bylaws later that day. There was no such provision. The parking spot assignments were tied to the property deeds and recorded with Jefferson County. Deborah had no legal right to park there, but she had done it anyway. When I got off work at 5 p.m., her Mercedes was still in my spot. I had to park in a visitor space 3 buildings away and walk through the snow to get to my townhouse. I called the non-emergency police line to ask about having her towed, but they said it was a civil matter and I needed to go through the HOA or take her to small claims court. The next morning, her car was gone. I assumed the problem had resolved itself. I was wrong. This pattern continued throughout November and into December. Every time it snowed, I would clear my spot, and within a few hours, Deborah would park her Mercedes there. Sometimes she would leave it for an hour, sometimes for the entire day. I documented each incident with photographs and timestamps. I sent emails to the HOA board requesting they address the issue. I received a form letter response stating that parking disputes between residents should be resolved amicably without board intervention. Except Deborah was not just another resident. She was the HOA president, and she was clearly abusing her position. I tried talking to other neighbors about it. Mr. Henderson was sympathetic but afraid of retaliation. "She fined me $300 last year for painting my shutters the wrong shade of cream," he told me one evening. "I cannot afford to get on her bad side." A younger couple in the adjacent building, the Mortons, had their own horror stories. Deborah had reported them to the county for having a garden in their backyard that supposedly violated landscaping rules. The county had dismissed the complaint, but the legal fees had cost them over $1,000. By mid-December, I was at my wit's end. Every snowfall became a battle. I would clear my spot, Deborah would take it, and I would have to park somewhere else. I started leaving notes on her windshield asking her to stop. She ignored them. I sent certified letters to her home address. She responded with violation notices claiming I was harassing a board member. The weather forecasts for the week before Christmas were ominous. A massive storm system was developing over the Pacific and pushing inland. The National Weather Service was predicting a potential blizzard with up to 2 feet of snow and wind gusts over 40 miles per hour. Colorado Governor Jared Polis issued a pre-storm warning, and local authorities were advising residents to stock up on supplies and avoid unnecessary travel. I spent the weekend before the storm making preparations. I bought extra groceries, filled up my gas tank, and made sure I had plenty of firewood for my fireplace. I also made a decision. If Deborah parked in my spot during this blizzard, I was going to have her car towed. I did not care about the consequences anymore. The storm hit on Tuesday morning. I woke up to howling winds and snow coming down so thick I could barely see the parking lot from my window. The Weather Service had upgraded the storm to a blizzard warning, and the governor had declared a state of emergency. All non-essential travel was banned, and even the highways were closing. I worked from home in my upstairs office, monitoring the storm updates between video calls and coding sessions. By noon, we already had over a foot of snow on the ground, and it showed no signs of stopping. The HOA sent out an email saying that snow removal would be delayed until the storm passed and conditions were safe for contractors to work. Around 2 p.m., I heard a vehicle engine struggling through the snow outside. I looked out the window and saw Deborah's Mercedes crawling through the parking lot. She pulled directly into my assigned spot, which was currently buried under more than a foot of snow. She got out, bundled in her coat, and trudged toward the clubhouse building. I felt my blood pressure spike. The audacity of this woman was astounding. In the middle of a blizzard during a travel ban, she was still playing her parking spot power games. I spent the next hour researching towing companies. Most were closed due to the storm, but I finally found one that was still operating emergency services. Rocky Mountain Towing, based out of Golden, was accepting calls for vehicles that were blocking access or creating safety hazards. Is the vehicle preventing emergency access? The dispatcher asked when I called. I looked out at the Mercedes, buried in the still falling snow. It is in my assigned parking spot during a blizzard. I may need to move my vehicle for an emergency, and I cannot do that with her car blocking my spot. Do you have documentation showing it is your assigned spot? Yes, it is on my property deed and the HOA parking assignment records. Okay, we can send a truck out, but it is going to be a few hours. We are dealing with a lot of calls right now. The fee is $200 plus storage costs of $50 per day. The owner will have to pay that to retrieve their vehicle. That is fine. Please send someone when you can. I gave them my information and the location. Then I went back to work, checking the window periodically to see if Deborah had returned to her car. She had not. The snow continued to fall. By 5 p.m., we had almost 18 inches on the ground, and visibility was near zero. The tow truck finally arrived around 6 p.m. A massive vehicle with chains on all 4 tires and emergency lights flashing through the white-out conditions. The driver, a burly man named Mike, knocked on my door. I had to push hard to open it against the snow drifts that had formed on my front step. "Are you Franklin Calloway?" he asked, snow caking his beard. "That is me. The car is right there." I pointed to the Mercedes, which was now barely visible under the accumulating snow. Mike trudged over to inspect it, then came back. "This is going to be tricky in this weather, but we can do it. I need you to sign here confirming you requested the tow and that you are the assigned owner of this parking space." I signed the paperwork, my fingers already going numb from the cold despite my gloves. Mike went back to his truck and spent the next 20 minutes carefully positioning his vehicle and attaching chains to the Mercedes. The whole process was almost surreal, watching this tow truck operator work in near-blizzard conditions to remove an HOA president's illegally parked car. Just as Mike was lifting the Mercedes onto the truck bed, I saw movement near the clubhouse. Deborah was trudging through the snow, waving her arms and shouting. The wind was too loud for me to hear what she was saying, but her body language made her fury perfectly clear. She reached Mike just as he was securing the final chains. I walked out into the storm to be present for what I knew was going to be an ugly confrontation. "What do you think you are doing?" Deborah screamed at Mike, her face red with rage and cold. "That is my car." Mike, unimpressed, checked his clipboard. This vehicle was parked in a privately assigned parking space without the owner's permission. I have a legal right to tow it. I am the HOA president. I have authority over all parking spaces in this community. She turned her fury on me. "You did this. You called them. You have been parking in my assigned spot repeatedly for months despite my requests to stop," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is my parking space according to my property deed. You have no right to park here. I will have you fined for this. I will have you taken to court. I will make your life a living hell." She was practically shrieking now, snow accumulating on her shoulders and hair. Mike interrupted. "Madam, if you want your vehicle back, you need to contact Rocky Mountain Towing. The fee is $200 for the tow plus $50 per day storage. We are located in Golden." He handed her a card. "Golden? That is 20 miles from here. How am I supposed to get there in this blizzard?" She looked at the card like it was a personal insult. "That is not my problem, madam. Have a good evening." Mike climbed back into his truck, and within minutes, he was driving away with Deborah's Mercedes secured on the back. Deborah and I stood in the parking lot as the storm raged around us. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Franklin Calloway. I am going to make sure you regret this. You have been abusing your position as HOA president for months," I said. "I documented every single time you parked in my spot. I have photographs, timestamps, and witnesses. You threatened me with harassment charges for asking you to follow the same rules you enforce on everyone else. I am done playing your games." She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. She turned and stormed back toward the clubhouse, disappearing into the white-out conditions. I went back inside, hung up my coat, and tried to calm down. My hands were shaking, partially from the cold and partially from the adrenaline. I had just declared war on my HOA president in the middle of a blizzard. Whatever happened next was not going to be pleasant. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. By Wednesday afternoon, it had finally moved east, leaving behind 22 inches of snow and drifts up to 4 feet in some areas. The state of emergency remained in effect while crews worked to clear major highways and roads. The metro area was effectively shut down. I spent Wednesday clearing my parking spot, my walkway, and helping Mr. Henderson again. The physical labor felt good, giving me an outlet for the stress of the previous day's confrontation. Other neighbors were out as well, everyone working together to dig out from the historic snowfall. Around noon, I got a knock on my door. It was Officer Patricia Martinez from the Lakewood Police Department, accompanied by another officer whose name tag read Officer James Walker. "Franklin Calloway," Officer Martinez asked. "Yes, that is me. Is everything okay? We received a report that you had a vehicle towed yesterday during the blizzard. The vehicle's owner, Deborah Patterson, claims this was done maliciously and placed her in danger during a weather emergency." I felt my stomach drop but kept my composure. "Please come in. I can explain everything." We sat in my living room and I pulled out my laptop. I had spent the previous evening organizing all my documentation into a comprehensive file. I showed the officers photographs of Deborah's Mercedes in my parking spot on numerous occasions, all time-stamped. I showed them emails I had sent to the HOA board requesting intervention. I showed them the violation notices Deborah had sent me for trivial issues. I pulled up my property deed showing my assigned parking space number. "So this was an ongoing issue," Officer Martinez said, taking notes. "For over 2 months, she has been systematically parking in my assigned spot every time it snows, leaving me to park in visitor spaces or on the street. I sent multiple requests asking her to stop. I tried to go through the HOA board, but she controls the board. Yesterday, during the blizzard, she did it again. I called a towing company that was still operating emergency services. Officer Walker spoke up. "Why did you feel the need to have her towed during a blizzard specifically?" "Because I had reached my breaking point," I said honestly. I had tried everything else. Talking to her directly, going through the HOA, documenting everything. Nothing worked. She continued to abuse her position as HOA president to park wherever she wanted. When she parked in my spot during a declared state of emergency, I decided enough was enough. The officers exchanged glances. Officer Martinez closed her notebook. "Mr. Calloway, while I understand your frustration, having someone's car towed during a blizzard could be seen as creating a dangerous situation. Miss Patterson claims she had to walk home in the storm and could have been injured or worse. The clubhouse where she was parked is less than 200 yards from her townhouse," I said. "I watched her walk back. It took her maybe 5 minutes. She was not in any real danger." "That may be true, but perception matters in cases like this," Officer Walker said. "We are not going to file any charges, but I would strongly recommend you find a way to resolve this dispute without escalating further." After the officers left, I sat in my living room feeling frustrated. Deborah had literally been violating my property rights for months, but I was the one getting a visit from the police because I had finally done something about it. Thursday morning, I received an emergency notice from the HOA. There was a special board meeting scheduled for Saturday morning to discuss serious violations of community standards and resident conduct. I did not need a crystal ball to know I was the topic of discussion. I spent Thursday and Friday consulting with a real estate attorney named Jennifer Hartley, who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Denver, and we met over video call since the roads were still challenging. "Based on what you have shown me," Jennifer said, reviewing my documentation, "Miss Patterson has been violating your property rights repeatedly. The parking space assignment is part of your deed, which means it is a property right, not just an HOA courtesy. She has no legal authority to park there, regardless of her position as HOA president." "So what do I do about this board meeting?" I asked. "Go to the meeting. Bring all your documentation. Present your case clearly and calmly. If they try to fine you or take punitive action, we can fight it. HOA boards have authority, but they are not above the law. They cannot violate your deed rights or engage in selective enforcement of rules." Saturday morning arrived clear and cold. The sun reflected off the snow-covered landscape, making everything look deceptively peaceful. I dressed in business casual, loaded all my documentation into a leather portfolio, and walked to the clubhouse for the 9 a.m. meeting. The community room was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the drama, and at least 30 residents had shown up to watch the proceedings. The 5 board members sat at the head table. Deborah was in the center, flanked by her friends Margaret, Susan, Linda, and Carol. "This meeting will come to order," Deborah said, banging a gavel. She looked at me with undisguised contempt. "We are here to address serious violations of community standards by Franklin Calloway of Unit 47B. Mr. Calloway had a fellow resident's vehicle towed during a declared weather emergency, placing that resident in potential danger and showing complete disregard for community welfare." I raised my hand. "May I respond to these accusations? You will have an opportunity to speak after we present the evidence," Deborah said coldly. For the next 15 minutes, Deborah laid out her case. She claimed I had been a problem resident since moving in, accumulating multiple violations, and showing a pattern of disrespect for HOA rules. She described the towing incident as malicious and dangerous, claiming she could have suffered hypothermia walking home in the blizzard. She even brought up the fact that the police had visited my townhouse, implying I was under investigation for criminal conduct. It was a masterful performance of manipulation and misdirection. If I had not known the real story, I might have been convinced I was the villain. "Mr. Calloway, you may now speak," Deborah said, her tone making it clear she expected me to grovel. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, opening my portfolio. "Thank you. I have prepared a comprehensive presentation of the facts in this matter." I spent the next 20 minutes laying out everything. I showed photographs of Deborah's Mercedes in my parking spot on 23 separate occasions over 2 months. I displayed the timestamps showing this happened consistently after snowfalls. I read excerpts from my emails to the board requesting intervention. I showed my property deed proving the parking space assignment. I even pulled up the weather data from the day of the towing, showing that visibility during the time Deborah walked back to her townhouse was actually decent because the worst of the storm had temporarily passed. "Miss Patterson has repeatedly parked in my assigned parking space, which is a violation of my property rights as established by my deed," I said. "I attempted to resolve this through proper channels multiple times. The HOA board, which Miss Patterson controls, refused to intervene. I documented everything and finally took legal action to protect my property rights. I broke no laws and violated no HOA rules. Miss Patterson, however, has been violating my deed rights for months." The room was silent when I finished. I could see several residents nodding in agreement. Mr. Henderson gave me a subtle thumbs up. Deborah's face had gone through several shades of red during my presentation. That parking spot was not being used at the time I parked there. I was conducting HOA business and needed a cleared spot. It is my assigned spot. "You have your own assigned spot. Clear your own spot," I said simply. Margaret, one of the board members, spoke up. "Deborah, do you have documentation showing you have authority to use residents' assigned parking spots?" "I do not need documentation." "I am the HOA president," Deborah said, her voice rising. "Actually, you do," said a voice from the back of the room. A man I did not recognize stood up. He was in his 60s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. "My name is Robert Chen. I am an attorney and I own Unit 23A. I have been listening to this meeting with great interest. Miss Patterson, as HOA president, you are bound by the same bylaws as every other resident. Those bylaws do not grant you authority to use other residents' assigned parking spaces. Mr. Calloway's parking assignment is part of his property deed, which supersedes HOA bylaws. You have been violating his property rights. Deborah looked like she had been slapped. Mr. Chen, this is not your concern. It absolutely is my concern. I sit on the HOA board of my office complex downtown, and I can tell you that what you have been doing could expose this HOA to significant legal liability. If Mr. Calloway decides to sue the HOA for allowing you to repeatedly violate his property rights, he would likely win. The room erupted in conversation. Several residents started asking questions at once. Susan, another board member, looked genuinely shocked. Deborah, is all of this true? Have you really been parking in his spot repeatedly? I needed to conduct HOA business, Deborah repeated, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Then you should clear your own spot or use visitor parking, Mr. Chen said firmly. You cannot just take assigned spaces because it is convenient. The meeting devolved into chaos. Board members were arguing with each other. Residents were shouting questions and complaints. Several people started bringing up their own issues with Deborah's enforcement practices. The carefully controlled environment Deborah had maintained was crumbling before my eyes. Finally, Linda, the board secretary, stood up. I move that we table this matter until we can consult with the HOA's legal counsel about the proper interpretation of parking assignment authority. Second, Carol said quickly. The motion passed 4-1 with only Deborah voting against it. The meeting was adjourned, and residents began filing out, many stopping to shake my hand or thank me for standing up to Deborah. Mr. Chen approached me on my way out. That took courage. HOA boards need oversight, and presidents like Miss Patterson need to be held accountable. If you need any legal advice going forward, here is my card. I walked back to my townhouse feeling cautiously optimistic. The meeting had not gone the way Deborah expected. But I also knew this was far from over. People like Deborah Patterson did not give up easily. Over the next week, the dynamics in Silverwood Estates began to shift. Several residents reached out to me privately, sharing their own stories of Deborah's overreach. The Mortons told me about the garden dispute in more detail. Mr. Henderson explained how Deborah had tried to force him to replace his roof, claiming the shingles were the wrong shade, even though his roof was only 3 years old. A woman named Rachel, who lived in Building C, described how Deborah had fined her $500 for having a wreath on her door that was allegedly too large by 2 inches. A pattern emerged. Deborah had been running Silverwood Estates like a tyrant for at least 3 years, using the HOA bylaws as a weapon to control and intimidate residents. The other board members were either complicit or too afraid to challenge her. Most residents simply paid the fines and followed her arbitrary rules because fighting seemed futile. But my public confrontation at the board meeting had opened the floodgates. People started questioning whether Deborah's enforcement actions were legitimate. Some residents began researching the bylaws themselves and discovering that many of Deborah's claimed rules did not actually exist in the official documents. 10 days after the towing incident, I received a letter from Deborah's personal attorney, a firm called Mitchell and Associates. The letter claimed I had damaged Deborah's vehicle during the towing process and that she was suffering emotional distress from my harassment. They demanded I pay $2,000 in damages or face a lawsuit. I forwarded the letter to Jennifer Hartley, my attorney. She called me within an hour. "This is complete nonsense," Jennifer said. "They have no photographs or documentation of damage. The emotional distress claim is laughable given that she was the one violating your property rights repeatedly. This is an intimidation tactic. Do not respond to them directly. I will handle this. Jennifer sent a response letter to Mitchell and Associates laying out the facts of the case and making it clear that any lawsuit would be vigorously defended, with counterclaims for the property rights violations. We never heard from them again, but Deborah was not done. In mid-January, I received a notice that the HOA was implementing new parking rules. All residents were now required to register their vehicles with the HOA office within 7 days or face having them towed. Additionally, any vehicle parked in an assigned spot that was not properly registered would be subject to immediate towing at the owner's expense. It was a transparent attempt to create a pretext for having my car towed. I registered my SUV immediately and made sure I had copies of all the paperwork. Then I noticed something interesting in the fine print of the new parking rules. They had been implemented by emergency board action, without the required 30-day notice period for bylaw amendments. According to the HOA's governing documents, any changes to the parking rules required a vote of the full membership, or at minimum, a properly noticed board meeting with opportunity for resident input. I brought this to Robert Chen's attention. He reviewed the documents and confirmed my analysis. This is a clear violation of the HOA's own procedures, Robert said. We were having coffee at a local shop near Belmer, one of the few areas that had been fully cleared of snow. I think it is time we called for a special election to recall the board. Colorado law allows HOA members to petition for a recall election if they can gather signatures from at least 10% of the membership. Silverwood Estates had 120 units, which meant we needed 12 signatures to trigger a recall vote. We got 42 signatures in 3 days. The petition was submitted to the board on January 20th. According to Colorado Revised Statutes Title 38, Article 33.3, the board was required to schedule a special meeting within 60 days to hold the recall election. Deborah tried everything to block it. She claimed the petition format was invalid. She said some of the signatures were fraudulent. She even tried to argue that the Colorado recall statute did not apply to HOAs, which was blatantly false. Robert Chen, who had emerged as the de facto leader of the recall effort, shot down every objection with precise legal arguments. He even filed a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate, which oversees HOA compliance with state law. The special meeting was scheduled for March 5th. All 5 board positions were up for recall, but everyone knew the real target was Deborah. The weeks leading up to the election were tense. Deborah sent multiple emails to residents claiming the recall was being orchestrated by troublemakers who wanted to destroy property values. She held a counter meeting where she presented charts and graphs supposedly showing how violations had increased under her leadership, which somehow proved she was doing a good job. I stayed mostly quiet during this period, focusing on my work and letting Robert Chen handle the political aspects. But I did compile a comprehensive document detailing all of Deborah's violations and overreach, which was distributed to every resident. The night before the election, I got a troubling email from Mr. Henderson. "Franklin, you need to be careful. I saw Deborah and Margaret going door to door tonight with some kind of petition. I think they are trying to gather votes to block the recall." I called Robert Chen immediately. He was not worried. The recall is happening whether she likes it or not. The votes have been cast by mail-in ballot. Tomorrow is just the counting. There is nothing she can do at this point. March 5th was a cold but clear Saturday. The meeting was held in the clubhouse at 10 a.m., with a court-appointed monitor present to ensure fair counting of ballots. Over 90 residents showed up, the largest turnout in Silverwood Estates history. The results were not close. All 5 board members were recalled by votes of at least 70 to 40. Deborah herself lost 85 to 25. A new election was held immediately for the 5 board positions. Robert Chen was elected president by acclamation. The other 4 positions went to residents who had been vocal about HOA reform, including Mr. Henderson and Sarah Morton. Deborah sat in the back of the room during the vote counting, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. When the results were announced, she stood up without a word and walked out of the clubhouse. I never saw her at another community meeting again. The new board's first action was to rescind all of Deborah's emergency parking rules. The second action was to launch an audit of HOA finances, which Robert Chen insisted was necessary given the lack of transparency during Deborah's tenure. What the audit found was shocking. Over the past 3 years, Deborah had spent over $40,000 of HOA funds on personal expenses. She had billed the HOA for her car payments, claiming she needed a reliable vehicle for HOA business. She had charged expensive dinners at local restaurants as board meetings, even though they were clearly personal meals. She had even paid her son $5,000 for consulting services that appeared to consist of nothing more than updating the HOA website once. The new board immediately filed a report with the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office. Within 2 weeks, Deborah Patterson was charged with theft and embezzlement. I attended the preliminary hearing at the Jefferson County Justice Center in Golden. It was surreal seeing Deborah in a courtroom, standing before a judge, being read formal charges. Her attorney tried to argue that the expenses were legitimate HOA business costs, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Richardson, laid out a clear case of financial misconduct. Miss Patterson systematically abused her position as HOA president to enrich herself at the expense of the community she was supposed to serve. She created fake invoices, submitted fraudulent expense reports, and used HOA funds as her personal bank account. The judge set bail at $10,000 and scheduled a trial date for June. In May, 3 months before trial, Deborah's attorney reached out to the district attorney's office with a plea deal. Deborah would plead guilty to theft charges, pay full restitution to the HOA, and accept probation. In exchange, the embezzlement charges would be dropped. The HOA board, now under Robert Chen's leadership, accepted the deal. The priority was recovering the money, not seeking revenge. On June 12th, I attended the sentencing hearing. Deborah stood before Judge Michael Torres in the Jefferson County District Court and formally pleaded guilty to theft by deception. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to pay $42,000 in restitution, and required to complete 100 hours of community service. "Miss Patterson," Judge Torres said, looking down at her from the bench, "you were entrusted with a position of responsibility within your community. You violated that trust in pursuit of personal gain. Your actions harmed your neighbors and undermined the very purpose of homeowner associations. I hope you use this period of probation to reflect on your conduct and make meaningful changes." Deborah did not say anything. Her attorney thanked the judge, and they left the courtroom quickly. As I walked out of the Justice Center into the June sunshine, I felt a sense of closure. The parking spot dispute that had started this entire saga seemed almost trivial compared to where it had ended up. But that was how these things worked sometimes. One instance of standing up to someone who abused their authority had revealed a much larger pattern of misconduct. I drove back to Silverwood Estates, where the community had transformed under new leadership. Robert Chen's board had implemented transparent financial reporting, created a resident grievance process, and reformed the violation system to ensure fairness and due process. The atmosphere in the community had shifted from one of fear and resentment to something approaching actual neighborliness. My parking spot had been blissfully clear since the recall election. Deborah had stopped attending community events altogether, and rumor was that she was planning to sell her townhouse and move out of state once her probation was complete. I never did find out whether Deborah learned any real lessons from the experience. Some people are capable of genuine reflection and change. Others simply remain bitter about being caught. I honestly did not care which category she fell into. My focus was on the positive changes in the community and the friendships I had formed during the fight for accountability. One Saturday afternoon in late July, I was sitting on my small patio reading when Mr. Henderson walked over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, settling into my spare chair with a contented sigh. "Thanks," I said, accepting the cold bottle. "What brings you by?" "Just wanted to thank you again for what you did back in the winter." Standing up to Deborah, going through with the towing, organizing the recall. A lot of us were too scared or too tired to fight back. You showed us it was possible. I took a sip of beer and thought about everything that had happened. I almost did not do it. Having her car towed during that blizzard felt like such an extreme step. I was second-guessing myself right up until the tow truck drove away. "Sometimes extreme situations call for extreme measures," Mr. Henderson said. Deborah had been abusing her power for years. Someone had to put a stop to it. I am glad it was you. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the summer evening. The mountains were visible in the distance, still capped with snow despite the warm weather. Kids were playing in the common area, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The community felt alive in a way it had not when I first moved in. "You know what the funniest thing is?" I said eventually. "This all started because I just wanted to park in my own assigned parking spot. That was literally all I wanted. I did not set out to take down the HOA president or uncover embezzlement or reform the community." Mr. Henderson chuckled. "That is how it always starts. Someone pushes you one too many times and you push back. Then you realize the problem is bigger than you thought, and before you know it, you are standing in front of a judge watching someone get sentenced for crimes you helped expose." "You think she will actually change?" I asked. "Deborah, I mean. Do you think she understands what she did wrong?" Mr. Henderson considered the question carefully. "Probably not. People like her tend to see themselves as the victim. She will probably spend the rest of her life telling people she was unfairly targeted by residents who did not appreciate her dedication to the community. But the important thing is that she cannot hurt anyone here anymore. The community has safeguards now. That is what matters." He was right. The reforms Robert Chen's board had implemented would make it much harder for another Deborah Patterson to abuse their position. Financial transparency, term limits for board positions, regular audits, and a robust grievance process all combined to create checks and balances that had not existed before. As summer turned to fall, life in Silverwood Estates settled into a new normal. The board meetings were actually productive now, focused on maintenance issues and community improvements rather than enforcement actions and power plays. Residents volunteered for committees without fear of retaliation. The neighborhood social events, which had been tense affairs under Deborah's presidency, became genuinely enjoyable gatherings. In September, almost a full year after I had first met Deborah in my parking spot, I came home from running errands to find a "for sale" sign in front of her townhouse. True to the rumors, she was leaving. I felt no satisfaction seeing the sign, just a mild sense of relief. Her departure would be the final chapter in this saga, The townhouse sold quickly to a young couple with a baby. They seemed nice, waving hello whenever our paths crossed. I helped them move in on a crisp October morning, carrying boxes and offering advice about the community. No one mentioned the previous owner or the drama that had consumed Silverwood Estates the year before. It was ancient history now, relevant only as a cautionary tale about the importance of accountability. I was carrying a box of kitchen supplies up their front steps when the husband, a friendly guy named Jason, asked me about parking. "So we have assigned spots, right?" The realtor said Unit 47B has spot 47B. "Is that how it works?" "Yes," I said, setting down the box. "Your spot is listed on your deed. Make sure you register your vehicles with the HOA office within a week. They are pretty good about enforcing the rules now, but they are fair about it." Good to know. And people actually follow the parking assignments. We rented a condo in Denver before this, and parking was always a nightmare. People just parked wherever. I smiled. "Trust me, people follow the parking assignments here. It is taken very seriously." Jason laughed, not understanding the subtext behind my comment. That was fine. He and his wife could enjoy their new home without inheriting the baggage of the past. As I walked back to my townhouse that afternoon, I looked at my parking spot. My SUV sat there, exactly where it belonged, in the space that was legally mine according to my property deed and HOA assignment. No Mercedes SUV blocking it. No violation notices threatening fines for imaginary infractions. Just my vehicle in my spot, in a community that had learned the hard way about the importance of accountability and the rule of law. It had been a long journey from that first snowfall in November, when I cleared my spot only to find Deborah parking there hours later. The decision to have her car towed during the blizzard had seemed like a desperate move at the time, possibly even petty. But it had been the catalyst for exposing a much larger pattern of abuse and corruption. Sometimes standing up for yourself, even in small ways, can have ripple effects you never anticipated. My parking spot dispute had led to an HOA reform, financial audits, criminal charges, and ultimately a healthier community. None of that would have happened if I had just accepted Deborah's behavior and continued parking in visitor spots. The winter came again, bringing the usual Colorado snowfalls. Each time it snowed, I cleared my spot, and it remained mine. No one parked there but me. The new HOA board hired reliable contractors who plowed the lots promptly. The violation notices decreased dramatically, issued only for legitimate safety or maintenance concerns. The community thrived. In December, Robert Chen organized a holiday party at the clubhouse. It was the best-attended event in years, with residents from all sections of Silverwood Estates mingling and celebrating together. Someone had set up a karaoke machine, and Mr. Henderson was attempting a surprisingly decent rendition of Johnny Cash when Robert pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did last year," Robert said. "This community was heading in a bad direction under Deborah's leadership. You were the first person brave enough to really push back." "I just wanted my parking spot," I said, repeating what had become my standard response. "And that was enough. Sometimes that is all it takes. One person saying enough is enough." Robert raised his glass. "To parking spots and the principles they represent," I clinked my glass against his. "To parking spots." As midnight approached and the party wound down, I walked back to my townhouse under a clear December sky. Stars were visible despite the light pollution from Denver, and the air had that crisp, clean quality that only comes with Colorado winter nights. My breath formed clouds as I walked, my boots crunching on the salted sidewalks. I thought about the journey this year had taken me on, from frustrated new homeowner to accidental community reformer. I thought about Deborah, wherever she was now, and whether she had learned anything from her fall. I thought about the 42 residents who had signed the recall petition, finding their voices after years of intimidation. I thought about Robert Chen's new board, working to rebuild trust and transparency. Most of all, I thought about the simple principle that had started it all, the right to use your own property without interference. The legal system had worked eventually. The HOA reform had succeeded despite resistance. The community had come together, overcoming fear and apathy. Justice had been served, even if it had taken longer than anyone wanted. As I reached my townhouse, I looked one more time at my parking spot. Empty now, waiting for me to park there tomorrow morning when I left for the grocery store. My spot, my space, my right. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme of life. But small things matter. They add up. They set precedents. They establish whether we live in communities governed by rules and fairness or by the arbitrary whims of whoever happens to be in charge. I went inside, hung up my coat, and settled in for the night. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle flakes drifting down to blanket the community in fresh white. Tomorrow I would clear my spot again, and it would remain mine. That was how it should be. That was how it would be. The saga of the parking spot was over. The community was better for it. And I had learned that sometimes the biggest battles start with the smallest disputes, but they are worth fighting when principles matter more than convenience. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt content. The past year had been stressful, frustrating, and occasionally frightening. But it had also been necessary. Silverwood Estates was a better place now because residents had decided that accountability mattered, that rules applied to everyone equally, and that abuse of power would not be tolerated. All because I decided to have a car towed during a blizzard. All because I insisted on my right to park in my own assigned spot. All because I refused to accept that might makes right. It had been worth it. Every moment of stress, every confrontation, every legal filing, every board meeting. It had all been worth it to establish the principle that even small injustices deserve to be challenged. And my parking spot had remained gloriously, wonderfully empty of Mercedes SUVs ever since.